everybody. My name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, idiot, and loin streamer, and today we're going to be lighting yet another fire, this time on what it means to be told your writing sounds like YA. This is going to be a discussion, but also with some examples of my own, and so I'm going to look forward to that. But before we get started, number one, if you enjoy what I do here on the channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Number two, if you would like to be featured on the channel, check out the links down in the description below. The number one way to be featured is through Lamai, the monthly prompt writing contest, where I give you a prompt, you write a short story revolving using that prompt, and on the first Monday video of the month, we read a couple of those submissions together because you guys are incredibly creative and talented. Beautiful. The second way to be featured is if you are an indie author and you have a book out or a book that is coming out. If you submit the first chapter and the cover to the Fresh Meat feature, it'll be read here on the channel to hopefully help more readers find your work and to encourage them to go and find the rest of what you do, because every story out there has an audience somewhere. They just maybe haven't found it yet. And the third thing is, if you would like to check out any of my books, they can be picked up at any of your favorite places to get books, and that includes the library if you request them, and OneDrive. With that said, let's jump into the topic. So I've determined that I don't care if people in any community, writing community or otherwise, consider me a pariah of sorts because I have opinions that they don't like. Authors sucking up to other authors, trying to rub elbows and just sell high ratings and books to one another and their following. I'll get your book if I'm interested in you as a person, not because I want something from you. I'll read your book if I want to know what you created, but I'm not really concerned anymore if a bunch of writers hate me for having an opinion, and I hope that others will also be brave enough to share opinions. And also, even if we disagree, we don't have to hate each other because we disagree. There are a lot of opinions, and I see a lot of opinions, especially because of these Saturday videos that, get people talking. And so I hope anyone that cares will come on as an individual and talk instead of about commonality that we have in an occupation or interest and the assumption that we're all in this together so that we can form, and instead actually address the subject without assuming the worst of the other person. We are not a hive mind. Nobody is ever a hive mind, and to assume that somebody is evil or because they're trying to come out and get you or because they're trying to ruin you because they don't agree on something kind of just shuts the doors on actually understanding better. Just look at the discourse in the writing community. We're all in this together until you step out of line. People have a misunderstanding of what adult and children's literature is. Adult women especially are writing barely legal people having sex and swearing and think that that's what makes it adult literature when they don't even read adult literature. And then they get mad when someone says that their writing reads immature, and then they insult adult literature as trying too hard with the prose. Adult literature spans different age groups of main characters and different levels of detail, and that includes children's perspectives. But you're winning no points by writing immature prose and then getting mad when people say that it reads immature. I'm sorry that your squishy sad boy story first draft does not reach the levels of Chronicles of Narnia or anything else that is kind of considered a higher brow or a more masterful YA book. But there are things that make it stand out. Now, how did this whole conversation get started? It all started where a lot of conversations in the writing community start, and that is on Twitter. With "stop bagging on YA, it's a bad look. I've read plenty of books where the writing style is not for me. That doesn't make it bad. This kind of generalization is absurd, and literary writing full of incomprehensible purple prose is a complete turnoff to me, to each their own." Now, number one, I want to go ahead and say, if you're trying to make an argument to get people to not bag on your style of reading, your preference of reading, I don't necessarily think it's a great idea to be bagging on other types. You could just say, hey, I don't prefer other things without insulting them. But when I saw this topic pop up on Twitter, it was kind of the people that were defending YA as a writing style that were also attacking pretty much everything else. And it was pretty much coming down to the generalization that adult writing was always complex and purple and boring, and YA was quick and fun and enticing. That's kind of what the words being used together were. Let's go down to this original tweet where Esme has said, we need to talk about how a compelling story is often more important than the level of the prose, and how snobbery isn't a good look for anyone. What the frick does sound like YA mean? Readable, compelling, relatable? Okay, so I have some description of what I think YA is, and this is why I also want to present it to you. When you guys think of YA writing, what exactly are you thinking about? Because if you follow me on this channel and you check my backlog, you come to the loin stream, you see that I read very vastly. I read a lot of different genres, and so one of the benefits that I have from reading widely and also from having gone to graduate school where I was kind of required to read outside of my typical bubble is I got to see a lot of different choices that people make, a lot of different opportunities. And there are adult novels that write simplicity, that write straightforward. A lot of crime, a lot of thriller novels are very straightforward. A lot of romance novels are very straightforward. Depending on the genre that you enter into, the writing style and expectations are pretty different, but they're also pretty vast. So that's not saying that all crime novels are written simplistically or thriller novels are written simply, but you can see a variation of writing styles in adult literature, which means it's not snobbery, and it's not talking about the levels of prose specifically being in YA as being simple, because that can be in any genre. You can also have overly complicated writing in YA where it explains stuff that it doesn't need to explain, but that starts getting into some of my ideas of what I think of when I think of YA writing, and I'll get into the things that I identify as YA style of writing, but I want to posit it to you too. If you think of YA writing, what is it that comes to mind? And for me, saying something reads like YA doesn't have to be an insult. It's only an insult if you make it an insult, but there are certain things that can also cheapen the experience for me if it is written in a very straightforward, simple, kind of immature way. And again, that's going to get into my points on like what I feel like reads as YA writing. However, as I'm reading other books that are YA, but they're not poorly written YA, because saying something sounds like YA doesn't automatically mean it is bad writing, but there are identifiable characteristics to younger writing that you can find. But as I've read some better written YAs recently, there are other things that are also that you could still recognize within the writing, which has to do with telling, which has to do with telling you what the character's emotional states are very blanketly and making connections for the reader. There's also the way that the character is finding their place in the world where they are coming into, where they're becoming adults, and that very much, the issues involved with becoming an adult as a teenager very much relates to the YA. Also, an exaggeration of emotions, a melodrama for simple things are very, very YA oriented as a way. But going further back from Esme here, into what Emily said, we need to talk about how many sci-fi fantasy bestsellers and word-of-mouth favorites have absolutely unreadable prose. I can't tell you the number of times that I've read a sample chapter of a highly anticipated book and just been shocked by what made it on the page. We're talking Hugo Award winners here. It all sounds like YA. Now, having just finished Library of the Dead, which is a YA, not an enjoyable experience at all. A very bad YA, where the character talks immaturely, where there is no cohesion within the plot line, where there is very little character, where the character's arrogance is never addressed because her arrogance is seen as some power move, and even the villain, oh yeah, let's go back to that Mary Sue trope, even the villain is like, I am so impressed by you. You know what? Suddenly, I don't want to destroy you. I want you as friends, because I am impressed. I can think of so many stories that I have read where suddenly the villain or this big baddie that we see looks at the main character and is just like, you know what? We aren't enemies. I am super impressed by you. You are absolutely one of a kind. And if I can get you on my side with corruption and not destruction, that is what we're going to do, okay? Because I like you. I like you a lot. Only as friends, impossible for enemies. That happens a lot. It just happened in Library of the Dead. It's happened in other YA projects that I have beta read for. It happens in The Savior's Champion. It happens. And I am frankly surprised that Library of the Dead made it through Tor not only once, but 3 times. Because it's got 3 books. I am incredibly surprised that a book like Slay made it through a publishing house. Was that also by Tor? Somebody start checking on Tor there. If that is also Tor, we're gonna have some problems. But so what sounds like YA to you? And I can agree, there has been a lot of sloppy prose. And if you look at stuff, I think this is also a problem with the idea of new adult coming in, because it's literally just all of the YA tropes, all of the sloppy writing that is associated with YA. That's not saying that all YA is sloppy writing. That is saying there is sloppy writing associated with YA in the same way that over-dramatic, over-flowery meaningless fiction that is trying too hard is associated with adult fiction and literature. I mean, look over there at Nothing But Blackened Teeth. That was trying way too hard. I've read a couple of novels this year that it's like, you're seriously trying too hard, and I can tell. So if we can actually acknowledge, which obviously even in this tweet here, she's talking about, oh, literary writing. If we can acknowledge that people go over the top and get really pompous with the literary writing, the adult writing, then we can actually acknowledge that there is a lot of sloppy and lazy writing in YA, can't we? I mean, wasn't Lightlark dragged for being lazy because the main character is literally called Isla Crown, and then the king is actually, his name is actually Gold, and her other love interest, who is from the Shadow Realm, is named Grimshaw? And they're the Shadowlings and the Moonlings and the Starlings and the... Can we acknowledge that that was a whole discussion about how people thought that was uncreative and middle grade level, which we're going to get to because I have an example that's related to this whole conversation. And then, you know, we're in this talk of, hey, why don't you stop bagging on YA? But every time we get into this discussion of like YA versus adult fiction, number one, it's always adults that are arguing for it because it's adults that either are writing YA or are ashamed that they read YA or feel like they should be ashamed because people are saying crappy things. And this is also one of the reasons why I think we need to retire the term YA. YA mainly services adults at this point. More than half of the readership is women. More than half of the readership is people over 18. And the majority of the readership... which makes the majority of the readership adults. So no longer is it an age bracket. We can't pretend it's an age category because the majority of the readership that is being served is not the youth. So we need to actually just say teen fiction and adult fiction because adult fiction can contain this stuff that's younger adult but not actually for teenagers because teenagers are looking for something completely different when they're looking at teen fic. Anyway, that's a different tangent I've already been on. But by having this separation of YA and adult, it actually not only does it blur the lines of like, what is the audience for what, but it also turns it into this situation where I've seen adults that are actually afraid of reading adult literature because they don't understand the variation that is in adult literature or what adult literature looks like. So it's constantly this conversation of, well, maybe I like simpler prose or easy to read stuff, as if there's not easy to read fiction in adult fiction. You just have to go looking. It's all over the place. You just don't have to reach for the YA. It's everywhere. Not everything is super difficult to read just because it's listed as adults. Not everything is super flowery just because it's adult. Clive Barker is pretty straightforward. So then by having this separation of YA and adult, where it's mostly adults reading it, you end up with a situation where it's got adults arguing with each other and insulting each other, with those ones calling them pompous and those ones calling them stupid because they have the preferences in their readership. And then they say, hey, stop making fun of me. But then you get into the conversations. I could also argue that literary masterpieces she reads are also plotless, purple, pretentious garbage, but I won't do that. Look, I know that you're being passive-aggressive or sarcastic or whatever you want to call that, but if you want people to take you seriously, this is not the way to do it. This is not how you actually have a discussion about these literary merits. But hey, who am I to even assume that this is supposed to be some actual conversation about prose and about writing and about genre and about any of those preferences, as opposed to trying to like gain favor over one another or like play battle games. And then, you know, we got further down. I mean, this is not helping at all, but she doubles down and triples down in the comments. And what the frick, go back to TikTok, what a bitch. Look, you want to like, I am constantly just, for how many times I see conversations about leave readers alone, and like writers jumping on other writers for calling each other a bitch specifically. It is crazy to me how common it is for people to insult other people. I mean, it's all different people. I understand that. So I don't hold it like to that high of a level. Another that came up was this person saying, I think this was the initial tweet that I saw, which was Rita A. Rubin saying, I think that we need to retire the saying this reads like YA as an insult critique on adult books. No, it's an observation. And if you would prefer, I can actually say, look, I will agree with you because obviously I don't agree with the idea of YA literature existing. It's either teen fiction or it's adult fiction. So if you prefer, I can actually just call it immature writing. I can call it childish writing because in ways it really is. I mean, somebody getting this defensive obviously probably felt personally insulted by the conversation happening. I won't feel insulted if people don't like purple prose. If people don't, I mean, I wouldn't say I write purple prose, but I don't necessarily write straightforward either. I write a lot of atmosphere. And I leave it up to the reader constantly to pick up things that are happening in the story or relationships, like with Joey and Jag. I don't tell you what their relationship is. You just have to pick it up between what they are, because I'm not going to have Joey spell it out for you. That is constantly something that you find in YA books, or more immaturely written books, because it doesn't feel like their author can trust the reader to pick up on the conversation, to pick up on the relationships. And so as we go further into the comment section on this, I've read plenty of YA books and stories that were just masterful and overly lyrical. Intellectual prose doesn't mean a story is any good. So this is also something, is people associating adult prose with being lyrical or intellectual, while assuming that YA prose can't be the same. But I'm pretty sure that a lot of C.S. Lewis's stuff is considered YA, that Chronicles of Narnia is considered YA, that a lot of great things are considered YA or teen literature. However, there's this assumption that saying YA writing is an insult and has to mean something specific, or it's below. And if it's an adult, then it has to be purpley. And it's kind of assumed that if you like YA, then you're stupid, and if you like adult, then you're pretentious. I don't even know where to begin with this. It's such a messed up thing of how people categorize age categories and fiction. Getting further down here is like, what is this even supposed to mean? That it comes across as juvenile? Yes. Or maybe that it's a pleasure read and not intended for dissection. See, there's an assumption there that adult fiction is not meant to be just read and to have fun, when a majority of fiction is actually this style of fiction, even adult fiction. The conversations involved in this kind of suggest a lack of reading adult fiction, or reading very widely, but I'm not going to make assumptions here. But it kind of shows when you say, I think it's all of the above, that adult books aren't a pleasure to read and not meant to be dissected, or that the writing comes across as juvenile. Quote, if an adult book doesn't have a deep, complex plot, heavy world building, or a certain amount of sex or violence, then I can guarantee I've seen at least one person say that it should be for kids. I've also seen at least one person say that children should be able to consent. Just because you see someone say something that is stupid doesn't mean that it's true or that it should really be given any thought. I know while I'm sitting here writing this whole video, but here we just get more of, personally, I often enjoy books more than when they read like YA, because it usually means that they are faster in their pacing and the world building is not as intense. You can still get a ton of detail and character building without the drag of a lot of adult novels. That again shows a closed-mindedness to what adult novel means, because adult novels go from freaking novellas all the way to full like bricks. Meanwhile, you've got bricks the same length as adult novels in YA, except all it does is over-explain emotions. So like, further down, I'm on board them. This reads like YA. Us. Oh, you mean fast-paced and enjoyable? So again, just insulting what is considered adult literature, and it makes me feel like people don't know what adult literature looks like, because maybe they have a very limited experience with adult literature, because adult literature is very, very vast, very stylized in different ways. If you've followed the ALA book review stuff on this channel, then you'll have an idea of what the YA reading feels like. Now, there is one more thing that I would like to add to this conversation about sounds like YA, because it fits into the YA discussion of based on the demographics that currently consume the most YA, and who is YA really serving right now. If it is mostly romantic fantasies or descriptions of sex or whatever else you would drop those categories into, and it is mostly read by adult women, I wanted to take a look at this because it has come up previously with teenagers saying, hey, we would like to have less sex, or we would like to read books that have less sex in them. It's come up in discussion of seeing people just generally say, hey, I don't need every single movie to have sex in it. And it has come up pretty much in various places. And now there was this article that recently came out, at least a couple of articles that have to do with this study. UCLA study says Gen Z wants less sex on screen, prefers platonic relationships depicted to romantic roller coasters, which when they're being fed stuff like ACOTAR and Colleen Hoover and the like, it is no wonder that nobody would freaking want that, because it is so annoying. Apparently, if Gen Z has its wish, gone will be the days of gyrating teens on screen seeking sex, drugs, and recklessness a la Euphoria. The new UCLA Teens and Screens study conducted for the Center of Scholars and Storytellers found that across 50 1,500 members of Gen Z ages 10 to 24. Young people wanted more relatable stories that emphasized platonic relationships instead of sexual content. To note, only respondents age 13 to 24 were asked about intimate content. Adolescents opted to see lives like their own on screen, which included less romance. 48% of adolescents feel that sex and sexual content is not needed for the plot for most TV shows and movies, with 51.5% wanting to see more content focused on friendships and platonic relationships. Quote, while it's true that adolescents want less sex on TV and in movies, what the survey is really saying is that they want more and different kinds of relationships reflected in the media that they watch. Dr. Yalda T. Uls, founder and director of CSS and co-author of the study, said, we know that young people are suffering an endemic of loneliness, and they're seeking modeling in the art they consume. While some storytellers use sex and romance as a shortcut for character connection, it's important for Hollywood to recognize that adolescents want stories that reflect the full spectrum of relationships. I would also like to say personally, and this is obviously just going to be my experience, I invite you guys to share what your thoughts are in general. But number one is that I personally feel somewhat sexually harassed and almost sexually abused by the amount of sexual content that is thrown in my face nonstop all the time. And yeah, I can put it down, and I do put it down. If I don't want to deal with it, I just put it down. But there is a problem, at least that I have seen, where you say, hey, I would like to not have sex in it and in everything that I consume. And all that happens is you get told kids have sex. Kids need to get used to seeing sex, feeling sex, looking at sex all the time. What are you, a child, if you don't want to see sex? And you just get mocked and belittled, and sex still forced on you, even if you just say that it is your preference to not have sex. For some reason, it's okay to say that you prefer sex, but if you just say that you would prefer that everything not be sexually powered, not be about sex and eroticism, you get bullied up on. And so that is also there. And I don't think it had so much to do with just it being about an endemic of loneliness and wanting to see relationships modeled. It's just sex is a private thing, and the amount of sexual gratification of getting into the nitty-gritty wet details of every sexual intercourse is not necessary. It's not helpful. It doesn't mean anything, and it is repulsive at some point because you're just being waterboarded. Then you know what the liquid is. And not everybody needs it. Not everybody wants it. And so it is not specifically anything is wrong with anybody. And it's kind of bizarre to me to paint any not wanting of sex or any wanting of less sex shoved in the face as there being an inherent issue with the person, instead of it just being, hey, I can have a healthy sexual relationship, a healthy relationship with sex without it being in every bit of my content. In fact, I think that if you have a need for graphic sexual detail being the key word, not sex in general existing in a story, but graphic sexual detail existing in a story on TV, watching softcore pornography on TV. If your story requires that for you to be entertained, it might be fair to investigate if you have an unhealthy relationship with sex, but that is another thing entirely. I think there's more here than that, and that's kind of boiling it down to an extreme. Oles pointed to the scientific fact that modern young people are having less sex than their parents did at their age, and many prefer to stay single. Now, this could be because of psychological reasons, of not wanting to be with another person, of personal a viewing of the self that makes it uncomfortable. I honestly think that the amount of sex that's been put in everything has actually abused and traumatized the next generation. And to some extent, exposure to sexual content too early, even in my generation, has left many feeling uncomfortable with their bodies, not wanting anything to do with sex, especially young women. And I think that the continual push to put more and more sex in front of kids via the stuff on the banned books list is actually affecting the psychology of the next generation. But we're never talking about the damage of the sexual content on children. It is always, or just adults, because continual exposure to sex can also affect adults in negative ways. But we're never talking about that. It's always about shaming. It's always about calling Puritanism. And it's always about saying, well, this is a banned book if we don't put sex for kids. There's more going on here. And I think that we're seeing the results of this repulsion to sex, this discomfort to the body, because of being traumatized through sex exposure. CSS Youth Engagement Manager Stephanie Rivas Laura who is also first author of the study, spoke up to her generation as a whole. As a member of Gen Z myself, I wasn't surprised by some of what we are seeing this year. There have been wide-ranging discourse among young people about the meaning of community in the aftermath of COVID-19 and the isolation that it came with. I think this is more than that. Adolescents are looking to the media as a third place where they can connect and have a sense of belonging. And with frightening headlines about climate change, pandemics, global destabilization, it makes sense that they are gravitating towards what most is familiar in those places. I think that is such a false way to frame what they are seeing, to make it entirely political and not about the mental exposure and the mental changes that happen to the brain when you are exposed to traumatic materials. And that's not saying that every time you're exposed to sex, it is traumatic, but there are traumatic events, especially exposing children to sex. It is studied, it is in the papers, and that is not being talked about. And I wonder why the idea of exposing children and youth to sex is never considered as part of what is affecting the relationships people have with others. And familiarity is also found in comfort of binge watching, with the twice as many surveyed adolescents opting to full drops of seasons instead of weekly episodes released. So will it be possible for the third season of Euphoria to find the same audience acceptance it once did? Perhaps less sex is key. So in general, just the idea of less sex. Where do you stand on this? What do you think may be causing some people to not want to have sex? Do you think that there is an issue with actually having an adult discussion about sex being involved in stories? Is it difficult to have that discussion because it feels like either all or nothing? Because that's been my experience with it. But then also going into this, if the next generation, which is Gen Z, isn't even the newest generation because we're now at Gen Alpha, but if a generation is like, hey, I would like less sex in what I am looking at because I don't feel like it's for me, then what is with all of the YA books that are written specifically as sexual kinks and sexual desires, sexual dreams, all of that, where the main focus is these relationships. The main focus is getting people off. It's just so much of it is that. And so then this takes me to what I wanted to say as a summary of what I think it means for something to sound like YA or to be YA. YA used to be an age category, and I think it still can be an age category if it is written with that category in mind. If you watch my video on Thursday, you'll see that I actually mentioned a book that felt like YA to me because of the trajectory and the style of writing, and it was appropriate for that age group. And it didn't have any of the adult content in it that you're currently seeing in stuff like Paper Princess or ACOTAR or Colleen Hoover, which Colleen Hoover is definitely an adult author. I don't know why they want to put Colleen Hoover in schools, but she's showing up there. But this is my summary of some of the elements, because we've covered a lot today. But so this is the summary that I have of what makes something sound like YA, what makes it feel like YA, the genre, not the age category. I think it's a frame of mind thing, because there are plenty of simple and straightforward adult novels that are written very plainly. So when the conversation comes up that pretends YA is just simply written and adult content is harder to understand, like I see that a lot when obviously earlier in the video, the chick was insulting adult content as being boring, as being purpley, as being all of this other stuff, where let's be real, you get terrible things in YA that can be overly fruity as well. But you can have straightforward adult novels that just tell you what is going on, especially in genres like thriller. It's a writing style more so than an age category. But I think some of that conversation has actually left people afraid or resistant to reading adult because they've built up what adult books mean in their head. Meanwhile, they'll be writing adult books but thinking that it's YA because of the way that they are writing it, and that's not where the difference is. There's this idea of turning it pretentious, so then you are different from everybody else and you can't move on to adult novels, so you have to be in YA, and then that's why they're pushing for new adult, but it's YA is new adult. It's all the same at this point. It is all the same. With the YA genre, you also have certain tropes and language, which is why I believe that YA is actually a genre and not an age category. Often in YA, you have exaggerated or extreme emotions for simple things, like saying I would die for you levels of love, especially love at first sight, extreme levels of anger at minor things, all of the kinds of relationships and drama that people put in stories. Often you have bully romances, you have like harem romances that have the bully, you have the mean girls and school tropes, and you also have a mindset of the YA hero who discovers how they fit into the world beyond their friends and family. They spend more time reflecting on what it means and analyzing the meaning of things around them and who they are. I do want to give some examples of some exaggerated language that reads like YA because I think that might help better understand what I mean. You've got, quote, "What you are is a fucking tragedy, Simon Snow. You literally couldn't be a bigger mess." He tries to kiss me, but I pull back. "And you like that? I love it," he says. "Why?" "Because we match." You have the same thing if you look at, that's what made The Perks of Being a Wallflower feel YA, as he had and I felt infinite. You know, where it's got this over-exaggeration. I feel super deep. I'm going to say something super deep, super angsty, and then there's that. Like at the beginning of ACOTAR. The first line of ACOTAR is, "Maybe I'd always been broken and dark inside." It's a level of a drama. It's a level of angst. It's a level of deepness that is shallow, but it's thinking that it's deep because it's teenager. Quote, "You have to pretend you get an end game. You have to carry on like you will. Otherwise, you can't carry on at all. I'm going to die kissing Simon Snow. Aleister Crowley, I'm living a charmed life. You were the sun and I was crashing into you. I'd wake up every morning and think this will end in flames." Sharing a room with the person that you want most is like sharing a room with an open fire. He's constantly drawing you in and you're constantly stepping too close and you know it's not good and there is no good and there's absolutely nothing that can ever come out of it, but you do it anyway. And then, well, then you burn. Just when you think you're having a scene without Simon, he drops in to remind you that everyone else is a supporting character in his catastrophe. He's still looking in my eyes, staring me down like he did that dragon, chin tilted and locked. "I am not the chosen one," he says. I meet his gaze and sneer. My arm is a steel band around his waist. "I chose you," I say. "Simon, I chose you." It's also the same thing that got you Alaska going, "Oh, you guys smoke cigarettes for the fun of it. I smoke to die." So it's like the really dramatic, kind of edgy thing. I hope you get an idea of what I'm talking about with the language in that. It's very over dramatic. It's often very shallow, but it thinks that it's not shallow because in that mindset, you think that you know everything. That's just how it is. I've got the cringy poetry, I understand. With YA novels, you also lean into the whole edgy vibe that a lot of people in my generation and younger are leaning into, especially my generation. My generation is obsessed with angst, with negativity, with depression, with bad endings. It's everywhere. And so then that leans more into the YA vibe. That's not that you can't write tragedies and negativity and bad endings without it being YA, but you can go over the top, and it does lend itself to depression and lack of hope, because when you're a teenager, that's just how you feel, is everything is a mess and there's no fixing it, and it's just, you want to die. So there is so much anguish and angst porn, hopelessness, and that style lends itself to the YA. And then finally, another thing that makes something read like YA is the main character is often fully taken care of, kind of like if you imagine a character being taken care of, or a person being taken care of by their parents as a teenager. So the main character never actually has any problems. They don't have to really worry about anything. If you think of ACOTAR with Feyre, she has actually no money problems. She's fully taken care of. You don't have to come up with like anything to actually be functioning, or else there will be consequences, because she is always taken care of to the amount that she needs to, unless it's to cause her misery, specifically to try and make her more sympathetic. But then she gets into the house with Tamlin and then Rhysand, and they're both paying her money to just exist, and they're putting her up. So there is no tension. There's no need for her to try to survive. She's just taken care of. There are also no consequences to the actions that are made. Everyone just loves the main character, regardless of what they do. If they're supposed to be a good guy, then they're just loved regardless. And if they do anything bad, it's not their fault. If you think of one of the books that I used earlier as an example in this, the love interest was the second in command to the main bad guy, but he was also brainwashed / being controlled. However, he could also sneak behind the back of his master and disobey his master knowingly and lie to his master knowingly, while also being able to disobey him. But that means, since he's supposed to be under the control of the bad guy, then he can't be held accountable for his actions. So that takes away any consequences, any self-reflection. He was always a good guy, and that is also a very YA thing to do, because that character is just plain good. They're not accountable for their actions. They didn't do anything wrong, and there's going to be no reflection on who they are. And in these books that feel like YA, everything is just handed to those characters. If you look at Lawn Boy, all the things came to him. He disobeyed. He didn't listen to his boss. He didn't really try to get a job. He applied for jobs that were over his head, didn't get them, complained about how America was the problem, and then people kept coming to him with better jobs. Everything was handed to him, and even the ending goal, not the ending goal, but even the ending change where he was asked to be a partner in a startup, it was just handed to him. And then he didn't actually have to do anything. He left the business side to his business partner, and he left the legal side to his boyfriend. And he literally didn't have to do anything. And looking for Alaska, all of the things came to the main character. In Perks of Being a Wallflower, everything came to him and he didn't have to be active. In ACOTAR, all the things came to Feyre. There was no external struggle or goal. It's just existing with all the needs met in the same way that you were just taken care of by your parent when you are a teenager. And so that summarizes, for me, what makes a book feel as if it is YA, or what makes the YA genre instead of the YA age category. And I do think that there is a difference, because I do think that there are still books that are age appropriate YA and fit the readership of YA. But I think what is currently sold and pushed at the top of everything as YA is actually just the YA genre, which is more appropriately the barely legal genre for adult women. And what is currently marketed as YA is not actually serving teenagers. But that goes into a conversation that's been had before. Maybe it will circle around again. I just thought I would rehash some of that with the new thoughts of what makes something sound YA, since that conversation came up. Let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. What do you think of when you think of sounds like YA? And on a side note, this conversation has actually been really helpful for me in thinking about the criticisms that I had for stuff like the Cyborg Tinkerer, where I said, well, the content is clearly not YA, but it feels like YA. And what makes it feel like YA? And so the months and months in between having put up my book review for that, and then getting here and seeing all the conversations about YA, reading different books sold as YA and books that actually are YA, has really helped me put into thought what it is that I'm seeing and why I would classify something as more of an immature narrative or narrator, or what is the genre of YA versus the age category of YA. So I really appreciate that, and it's helped me kind of just look at books a little bit differently and understand what I'm seeing and put that into words. So let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. Do you have an idea of what you think of when you hear or say sounds like YA, or this feels like YA? What do you think of teenagers or the next generation, Gen Z, saying they would like less sex and stuff? Do you think it is specifically them? Do you think they are the only ones actually being checked in on this right now? Because I think there may be more people than just Gen Z saying, hey, can we stop this? But it's not popular to say, because like I said, I think you get ganged up on if you even just opine, hey, a little bit less sex and everything. That would be great. I don't know. With all that said, thank you so much for watching. Have a great weekend, and don't die.
Was that Wayland Cross in the trunk? Do you know, or is that something that's still being figured out?
The person in the trunk was not Wayland Cross. Is he in trouble? We don't know who did it, but as the owner of the car, the longer he's missing, the worse it looks for him.
Cross isn't a killer. For the last couple of years, the average number of murders in Baltimore has been over 300, and it's been going up. Mind you, that's only whatever the badges count as official murder, and believe me, there are people that don't count when they die. Wayland? If you're down here, tell me. I'm not talking to the badges, I've been looking for you. They found a body in your trunk. Way. Why? Did you do that? To the left. Plain black letters read along the wall. You walked in the corridor. Once that ends, you chose the dark is on the right. My vision goes blurry, flickers black and black and black for longer intervals until I can't see anything at all. I'm not screaming anymore, but my voice echoes back to me. Where the hell am I? You're dead, Josephine. Even smart people do stupid shit sometimes, right?